Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Welcome to another edition of the Q Podcast. If you're tuning in today and maybe it's been a while or this is your first time, you picked the right day to tune in. And the reason is we're going to hear a talk. This is what we do here, right? We listen to talks and interviews that challenge people of faith to say, how do I stay curious about the world? How do I think well? And how do I then advance good? And so Q is this space where we're incubating these ideas, but they're meant to move people towards something. And today you're going to get to hear the talk that was ranked the #1 talk at Q 2017. So over 40 talks took place, and we always ask our participants to, at the end of the event, rank the ones that most challenged them and also that were just their favorite, that really stirred them to think in a new way. And this was it. It's by a man who goes by the name Propaganda. His real name is Jason Petty, but Propaganda is kind of his stage name. He's known as Propaganda, who's really a prophetic artist who doesn't mind going after so many of the topics and issues that many of us maybe get uncomfortable hearing about, but we need to hear about it. I mean, and isn't that what prophets do? They tell us the things that we need to hear, but maybe we weren't ready to hear. And when we're not ready to hear it, sometimes it kind of hits us in the face. It makes us stop. It makes us stand up and go, wait, I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know if I like that. But you can't walk away from it and go, I didn't just hear something that wasn't true. I mean, you heard the truth and it moves you. And so I think as you hear this talk from Propaganda, it's called Intersectional. You're going to hear about the world as we know it right now, but what is the future beyond it? I mean, so much of our discussions today in our culture have been around diversity, around race, around how do we get along with all of these differences, no matter what that difference is. And we have so many children growing up in a world where we're wanting to identify with who we've developed an identity around. You know, over 60 plus identities on Facebook as options for children to choose as to who they are. In a world that's starting to do that, so we're all individuals, you're finding a world that's starting to break apart a bit at the seams where we don't understand what draws us together. We don't know what brings unity or if that's even possible anymore. And Propaganda speaks right to that. He comes in and just says, look, here is the world as we know it, but here's where we have to go. This is the next stage of this conversation. And as the church, that's the thing I get excited about. How do we lead the way forward? Not just constantly respond and react and acknowledge where we've been wrong, but constantly have nothing to offer. Propaganda is saying, look, we have something to offer. Let's lead. And here's how we can think well about that. And so let's just listen in to this powerful talk for 9 minutes from Propaganda.
I want to present to you a concept called intersectionality. But before I do that, Kendrick Lamar last week released an album, his fourth major label release that probably sealed him as the greatest rapper of his generation. Now, not every generation, but of his generation, right? But that's not the interesting part of this story to me. The interesting part is the subplot that's happening, right? And the subplot that's happening is something that made him find himself finding something very seriously in common with an unlikely person. That person would be President Donald Trump. What does Kendrick Lamar and Donald Trump have in common? It's complicated. Intersectionality was first coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. She's the expert in something called critical race theory, right? And its textbook definition would be like, this is the study of how overlapping or intersecting social identities, particularly minority identities, relate to systems and structures of oppression, domination, or discrimination. Now, let me try to put some skin on that. In case you haven't noticed, I'm black. But I'm also a father of 2 girls, pray for me, right? When I'm with my daughters, I see people say, hey man, your daughters are gorgeous. You're in trouble, man. You better get yourself a gun. Hey, how about you raise your sons to respect women, huh? How about that? They don't have to kill nobody. Patriarchy much? So I'm a husband, I'm a father, but I'm also the son. I'm the son of a woman, duh. But I'm the son of specifically a black woman, right? Who got her rights in the 1960s. But if history tells me what I thought it told me, I thought the women's suffrage movement happened decades before that. But because if you understand history, the women's suffrage movement wasn't for women. It was for white women, which is why a couple hundred years later when we had our Women's March at the beginning of this year, where all kinds of people from all walks of life was flooding our streets, there was some problematic moments in there because a lot of these women were saying, yo, where were y'all when us undocumented women were getting our children snatched from us? Where were y'all when our sons were washing up on the shore in the Middle East? Where were y'all when black women were weeping, watching their sons being murdered in the street? When you don't understand your intersections, things can get very messy. Oh, it got quiet on me. So what does Kendrick Lamar and Donald Trump have in common? They introduced something that existed in the fringes. They brought it to the pop culture. What Kendrick Lamar did on his album, he introduced a street religion, if you will, called the Black Hebrew Israelites. Now, I know most of y'all don't know what that is, but what it is this, it's this concept that was kind of birthed out of a need to sort of affirm a black narrative. And basically the crux of it is the belief that blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans are actually the true Israelites. We're the true children of Israel. And the suffering that we're going through is because, according to Deuteronomy, we walked away from God's precepts. So until we start following the 10 Commandments, we're going to keep seeing the suffering that we're seeing. Right? That's the Black Hebrew Israelites. And in some senses, there's a lot of problems with that. In other senses, I understand. If you don't see your narrative being affirmed within the church for which you exist in, you're going to try to find a way to affirm your narrative, right? There's nothing wrong with the book, but whatever y'all are doing, don't say what that's saying, right? Was kind of what was happening there, right? And of course, there's some other problematic things, especially if you start parsing out the difference between a Mesoamerican and a Native American. That means you bought the narrative of the colonizer who drew a border in between Texas and Mexico. That's just who bought this. They're the same people. So there's that problem, right? Ultimately, what we're talking about is a way to take black and make it an identity. Now, what did Donald Trump do? Well, he kind of did the same thing. He just did it with nationalism. He stood on the stage and he said, look, either we're a nation or we're not a nation. Either we got a border or we ain't got borders. Either we take care of their kids or we taking care of our kids. Which one you want, right? Which was essentially what he was saying. And the alt-right was like, you know what? You are absolutely correct. Either we're people or we're not a people. What is American? They knew what their subtext was, because the subtext says, for me to understand what American is, I have to understand where America came from. And what they're saying is our European ancestors came here to create a world for them, by them, right? Clearly, if you understand the trajectory of the next 300 years, they ain't have inclusiveness in mind. They knew exactly who they was building this world for. Oh, they got quiet on me again. They knew exactly who they were making this world for. So when they say, hey, so when somebody says, hey, we're a nation of immigrants, they go, I call BS. And you know what? They're right. This nation was meant for their own people. That's why we've been fighting for the last 300 years to try to get included, right? Right? The only problem with their definition of white is too broad, according to their ancestors, because they wasn't talking about white people. They was like, no, specifically this part of the UK. Even the Irish, for crying out loud. You're on the same landmass. It's just the northern part of your island. What's wrong with you? Right? So anyway. But it created this concept of whiteness. And now whiteness has an identity. And the second something has an identity, now it has to have agency, right? But how do we move from an identity to being intersectional? That means we have to understand what intersectional says. What intersectional says is this. Now, if you're the believer, what it says is this. It says that every time I take communion, I'm reminded that I was once undocumented too. What it says is this. I sit in Southern California, the best state in the world. You could sue me, I don't care. I sit in Long Beach, California, and I look at Standing Rock, and I say, you know what? I am suffering and crushed under the same systemic pressures and oppression that created that system. And I also benefit from it because I know I'm standing on Native American soil. I look at the same misogyny and patriarchy that my PhD wife, my wife's a doctor. She still gets emails saying, hey, Alma, I was wondering about, I'm like, time out. Doctor Zaragoza Petty. Don't call my wife Alma. You understand what I'm saying? It's patriarchy. You understand what I'm saying? I understand that I am crushed under that same system because that same system set up the white supremacy that I'm still trying to fight. However, I still benefit from that system from my maleness. It's intersectional. Now, how do I move from intersectional to ally, which is what I believe we're actually called to? How do I move from intersectional to ally and then to advocate? Well, I got 3 suggestions for y'all, and I got a minute and a half to give it to you. One thing is, I got to throw out the concept of us versus them, that they the problem, because they is us. We talk about culture like it's just this thing up in the mountains, like it's us, right? We have to throw that idea. We have to throw out the idea that we are the sole purveyors of suffering, and don't nobody else suffer like I suffer. So I can't go march for those folk because, Black Lives Matter. They do matter, but if I understand that the same systems set their problem up, then what I can do is I don't have to be the sole purveyor of suffering, because when I do that, when I stand on my own island and I say I'm the only one that got problems, what it does is it undermines all of our works of justice. I need to understand that if they free, I'm free. I need to also understand that I'm not also the sole provider of solutions, meaning if you raising money for your thing, that don't mean it's a zero-sum total game. Just because you working in sex trafficking don't mean I'm not working in the school to prison pipeline. We working on the same things. It's intersectional. I need to resist the temptation to believe that my cause is the only cause. And then finally, I need to understand that unity is not uniformity. We're not called to sameness. We're called to oneness. You move from understanding your intersections to becoming an ally. Thank you, guys.
Well, I don't know what you're feeling right now, but in the room at Q, there was a general sense of people just standing up, clapping. This is truth. I just heard something I needed to hear. So no matter where you're at, you might be driving your car right now. You might be sitting in your living room or behind the desk with your earphones on. I hope you're feeling that as well. And I hope that's what it does for you today. I hope it just makes you think. I mean, it's only 9 minutes, right? But so challenging, so important for us to try to recognize the differences in the world. But what is it that brings us together? How is it that the image of God and being image bearers means that there's a connectedness here and there's a way forward in this? There's some beauty in all of the struggle that's happening if we can just have a vision to see it. And as people of faith, we have to be the ones to see it. We have to be those who insist on human dignity, who see a way forward, and who bring others into that vision. And I hope you've been inspired and encouraged to do that in your own life, in your own relationships, in the lives of your friends, and those who are around you who you would think of as different, that you'll now just have a little bit of a different view and perspective on how difference can make us stronger, and all of the opportunities that exist now for us to be part of renewing and reunifying those who for so long have just felt completely disconnected. You can also watch this talk at qideas.org, and I would encourage you to do that. Propaganda is a masterful communicator because he's a hip-hop artist, because he's a spoken word poet. He just knows how to communicate. You heard that, but man, when you see it, it just adds another dimension. You can see that at qideas.org today, featured on our homepage. Share that with friends. Let's pass this around. Let's get this conversation moving in all of our circles. And until next time, I hope you have an incredible week. Join us at qideas.org. Invite your friends to the Q podcast, and we'll continue learning, dialoguing, and stirring the pot on really important conversations.